And I wrote this list in my journal because I was about to turn 40, and I guess everybody jokes about 40s, that's you all the balloons and the decorations all become
They're
black
all
because it's
black,
like,
right?
yeah, they're like, this is it,
It's
you're
like you've got
halfway
one
there.
foot in the grave and one foot on a banana peel. It's like,
That's
guys,
it. It's
I'm
like
still here.
I'm living as Christ and I'm almost dying, for gain. So it's like I'm there. And that doesn't really, the age thing didn't bother me, but I kept thinking, I just wanted to think back and go, what have I learned? Because I am in such a different place in
Mm,
ministry
mhm,
and even in my life. And one of the big things was a mentor of mine years ago said, Robin, it takes a wise man to know who he is and who he isn't, and to
mhm.
be okay with that.
Welcome to Faith in the Folds, podcast for ministry, biblical studies, and Christian living. I'm your host, Kevin Burr. Today we get to hear from Robin Gough, Associate Minister for the Fairfax Church of Christ in Fairfax, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Robin recently shared on social media a list of 5 lessons he's learned during his nearly 2 decades in ministry. I thought it would be fun to dig into this list with him and maybe gain a little bit of insight into life and ministry. I know you'll be blessed by what Robin has to say, and I want to say that I had a great time talking with him through all these things. If you're enjoying the kinds of conversations we're having here on the podcast, would you be willing to like and subscribe to Faith in the Folds? And would you consider sharing this with someone you think could benefit from these? And as always, thank you so much for tuning in today. Well, Robin, man, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking some time out to talk with us about this list that you shared on Facebook. At the time of recording a few weeks ago, by the time this actually publishes, it'll probably be about like a month or so from when you actually shared this. But before we get to these items, as fun and interesting as they are, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, sort of how long you've been in ministry, where you're from, what you're doing now? Help us get to know the one and only Robin
Thank
Gough.
goodness. Thank goodness. So I am a Louisiana boy. I've been in ministry almost 20 years now.
Wow.
If we count part-time worship ministry, it's a little
Sure.
longer than that, but it's been almost, it's been a wild ride. I started out doing worship and then went to full-time, had no clue what I was doing. No, my undergrad was at a state school in music. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, and
Yeah.
God has worked through that. And
Where'd you go to
campus.
undergrad?
So my undergrad was at University of Louisiana at Lafayette.
Okay.
I'm a raging Cajun, and
All right.
which works well because my family's from South Louisiana, and then we're from the Cajun heartland. Shy. That's the way we do it. So I went to school there, met my wife there. She did not grow up in, I mean, she was Catholic and
Wow.
had no idea what it was going to be like marrying me and getting into ministry. And so I've been doing it though for, like I said, full time for almost 16 years.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I did campus ministry at LSU for 8.5 years, and now I'm in uh, Fairfax, Virginia. I've been here since 2016. Came here as a worship minister, and just my role changed to associate minister. So, yeah, it's a wild ride. I really enjoy it. You know how associate ministers work in most churches; they do all the things that. So, but
Yeah.
I get to preach more, and that's something that I never thought I'd do, but really have found that God has pulled me that direction, and I really love it. So.
Yeah. I I'm essentially an associate minister here. My title is discipleship minister. I'm actually glad I don't have to do a lot of preaching. That's one thing I really enjoy, and not having to
Oh
do very much.
man.
I'm actually, at the time of recording, I'm having to preach on the upcoming Sunday. And last night I was telling my wife, it's like, I'm not having a panic attack, but my heart rate is elevated because I haven't had to preach since like July or something when we left where I had been working to move down here. So
Wow.
to each his own,
Oh,
brother.
yeah, man. My grandmother used to say, "Oh, you're gonna be a preacher one day," and I said, "No, I'm not." And now here I am saying, "Hey, I love to do this. This is
I
great."
could get away with this, yeah.
Yeah, it's so odd, and I know, she would go, "Uh-huh, told you," you know.
Oh, isn't
So
it the worst too
yeah,
when they're so right, and like it's not like you made a mistake, right? And they said, "Well, I told you if you did this bad thing was going to happen." It's like they they knew that you were going to honor God in this way.
I know, like, uh,
You can't even be
why do
mad
you
at him because you're like
why do you have to be right?
you're doing the Lord's will.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So yeah, I've been in Northern Virginia. We're right outside of DC for almost 5 complete years, and it's been great. It's a whole new
yeah.
world up here, and
Yeah.
so
So like I wasn't going to spring this on you. I wasn't expecting to ask you this question, but since you mentioned it, I wonder if you'd be willing, if you could talk just kind of briefly about what have you noticed, right? So you're like growing up in Louisiana. Um, for those who don't know, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. Currently living in Corpus Christi, Texas. The those are places, from Corpus Christi, through Louisiana up to Nashville and covering much of the South. That's the Bible Belt. DC area starts to get you, I think, pretty square out of what would be considered the Bible Belt. If you don't have a ton to say about this, that's fine. But I'm curious, what have you noticed that's different about maybe growing up and doing ministry in Louisiana versus doing it now outside of DC like that?
yeah, that's a great question. It is definitely different. Down south, I mean, even if people don't have an active participation in a body of worship, at least Christianity,
Mhm.
they at least have a general idea of who Jesus is. Up
That
here,
yeah, yeah.
it's very different. Like none of my neighbors around me are Christian. None of
Mm.
them are native North Americans.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so it's the thing that I've realized about first when we moved here was that the Great Commission to go into all the world is a lot easier when you're in a place where the world is literally coming to
Like coming
you.
to you, yeah. I
So
can see that.
my neighbors next to me last year during pandemic, his mom, the mother of the family, it's a husband, wife, and their adult son who lived there. The mother flew back to India to go spend some time with her mom, and then she couldn't get back here
Oh
for
man,
6 or 8 weeks because of lockdown.
yeah.
The ones behind me are Korean,
Mhm.
and just moved in during the pandemic, and so it's just you're around so many different nationalities. But down south, there's an assumption that people have a general idea of who Jesus is.
Yeah,
Um, I
that's
mean,
fair.
they may not be a very good assumption or a very good idea,
Sure. Yeah.
but one thing that I've also noticed is, um, when I was in campus ministry, I was working with, college students all the time, and
Right.
there was a lot of a lifestyle that goes with that, alcohol and that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
that makes sense.
You would see that with
That's
college
that's
students.
at least the stereotype of state schools, right?
Right,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't across the board, but it would be there.
Sure. Yeah.
But you would never see church members who are adults, especially elders or anything, talking about alcohol or drinking alcohol
Hmm.
because um, it was just very different feel about that. Even though I was in Baton Rouge,
Mhm.
here it's a little bit more relaxed in some of those things. And I know that could be a divisive issue, but it's just
Yeah, it
one of
can
those
be.
things where you see where there's a difference between where the Bible Belt is and here. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting. I don't know that that's uh, always a good thing, but it's just there are some differences there.
Yeah.
So
I've noticed that down here too, that we're on the very kind of on the very outskirts of what I think you can consider the Bible Belt. Um, I mean, it'd be interesting to see sort of what some sociologists or study people who study religion consider the Bible Belt, but probably because I think if I'm correct, Corpus Christi is majority Hispanic. Like it's like
Mhm.
60 or so percent Hispanic. And with that tends to come a Catholic influence that's not a one-to-one correspondence, but it is common enough among Hispanics. And so there's a lot of church influence down here, not necessarily, I think, due to being in the Bible Belt, but I think due in large part to the church influence from Hispanic, particularly Mexican culture. I'm 3 hours away from
Mhm.
Mexico.
Yeah.
But it is also interesting because we're at the beach. I mean, I'm 20 minutes, my house is 20 minutes with traffic away from the Gulf Coast.
Wow.
And so we've got, 20 minutes of traffic, that might get you down the street out of your neighborhood near DC,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
But like we've got, yeah, it, I've been mentioning alcohol in particular. It's funny how it has been a lot more laxed out here too. But at a place, in, like you mentioned in, Baton Rouge or places where I've spent some time, Searcy, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, places like that. Yeah, there's still at least a public aversion to that kind
Yep.
of thing. It's a strange, a strange thing, but interesting that you've noticed that up there too.
Yeah. It is I mean, South Louisiana is not as they're Protestant, but there's a heavy Catholic influence,
Yeah,
especially in the Cajun world,
that makes sense.
in the Cajun Acadiana. But it's still comes with there's a certain aversion, like you said, a public aversion. Particularly whenever you're dealing with Protestants. There's always the jokes about the Baptists and Church of Christ, but here that doesn't seem to exist.
Yeah.
Or it's here, maybe to some extent, but just things, but that's me almost like I don't know where the word I'm looking for, but where that's a small little piece of evidence that shows that's evident of much larger issues and things like that. It
That's
does
fair.
things tend to be very different. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's predominantly Northern Virginia. You get to Southern Virginia, actually, you get 45 minutes southwest of where we are,
Mhm.
and you cross over the Shenandoah River, and people start talking to you in a different way. The tea is naturally sweet. I mean, it's just you hit back in the South. So
Yeah, yeah, and I can see that too. Yeah, the influence of a place like DC, especially with its international draw. Yeah, it's
that's a
very
big deal.
interesting. Yeah. All right, Robin, you shared on Facebook an interesting list of some things that you have learned over the years. And like I said earlier, I've got that list. I've got it here. I'm taking notes. Um, Tell us a little bit about these 5 lessons that you've learned and like what prompted you to share all these things. And if you don't mind, I'd love to hear you just kind of muse on some of these things as bits of wisdom that you've gained over the years in ministry.
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier about how I went to a state school,
Mhm.
and coming into ministry, especially in a college town. I didn't go into ministry first in campus ministry. I eventually transitioned into that role in a different city. But when I entered, I had no idea what I was doing. And I still don't. Let's be fair. I still am just trusting that God is working through my frailty and my imperfections.
Mhm.
But there was this pressure that I always felt to be a certain person. And some of that comes from my own personality flaws of I tend to be a little bit of a people pleaser,
Mm.
um and I wrote this list in my journal because I was about to turn 40, and I guess everybody jokes about 40s, that's you all the balloons and the decorations all become
They're
black
all
because it's
black,
like,
right?
yeah, they're like, this is it.
It's
You're
like you've got
halfway
one
there.
foot in the grave and one foot on a banana peel. It's like,
That's
guys,
it. It's
I'm
like
still here.
I'm living as Christ and I'm almost dying, for gain. So it's like I'm there. And that doesn't really, the age thing didn't bother me, but I kept thinking I just wanted to think back and go, what have I learned? Because I am in such a different place in
Mm.
ministry
Mhm.
and even in my life. And one of the big things was a mentor of mine years ago said, Robin, it takes a wise man to know who he is and who he isn't, and to
Mhm.
be okay with that.
I like
And
that.
and I've wrestled with who am I for a long time. Uh, I went to Harding School of Theology. Well, it was Harding University Graduate School of Religion at the time when I
Yeah.
started, and they changed. And you were adjunct. Oh, no, you were the GA for
GA for
Greek.
Dr. Black.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
graded my Greek exams, I'm sure, and I struggled to get through school because I was trying so hard to keep up with appearance that I knew what I was doing
Mhm.
as a campus minister, and I had no clue. I was just totally winging it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, and I wrote this list for myself because sometimes I feel that I need to come back to it regularly, and it's something that's been developing in my head for a while. Like don't take yourself too serious was the first one I wrote because I
So number one, don't take
number one,
yourself too
sorry, yeah,
serious. Yeah.
yeah, the first one I really was like, um, like I said, I remember when I didn't know anything about anything. I couldn't even tell you what the word exegesis means, but I knew I loved Jesus, and I thought those two were connected somehow, right?
I need some extra Jesus.
I know, and I was like, surely this is a good thing. And I I joked a lot. I had such a great sense of humor, sometimes a lot more immaturity, you know. And then I went to grad school and I got a degree, and then I got into doing ministry, and people would come and ask me questions, and I was like, well, this is great. I am a theologian, and I'm not, and I just got to the point where I was like, Robin, stop taking yourself so seriously.
Mhm.
You're still Robin Gough. You're still that goofy kid from the middle of nowhere, Louisiana, and you still don't know what you're doing. God is using you. Don't take yourself so seriously.
Mhm.
I think one of the things I've really loved, this is side note, but I've loved the Chosen
Oh man.
series.
Hadn't started season 2 yet, but we
Um,
absolutely love season 1.
oh my word. I what I love about it is this Jesus portrayal is that he doesn't. I mean, yes, he's fully God,
Oh yeah.
but his fully man isn't that he's always so serious because all the Jesus portrayals are always so stoic, and you're
Yeah.
waiting for them to do the hand signals and that are in the paintings and here
Yeah.
here he is just going, well, it's time to learn something new. It's
Right.
just great, and he laughs and jokes and anyhow,
Well,
I
his
not
his
don't take
episode
yourself too
like
serious.
sorry to butt in.
Nope.
The Chosen, which is available on YouTube. They've also got a free app that you can get on your phone, or you can buy the DVDs. They have it was for episode 3, season 1, episode 3. They take some artistic license, right? Seeing
Hmm.
Jesus interact with children, and like the way he does is like, oh, this Jesus is funny. This Jesus does kind of stuff that I do with my boys, and they're young.
Yeah,
This is fun.
it was
This is
just
fun.
I just really associated with him very much, and I was
Yeah,
like, okay,
yeah,
maybe. I mean, and I know it's artistic license. I get that, but at the
sure.
same time, I'm like, don't take yourself too seriously.
It's
Life is too
humbling.
short. It
Yeah,
is.
it's humbling not to, or it's humbling to realize that you are still God's instrument, right? It's
Mhm.
not up to you so much. It is your God working through you to bless others.
Yeah, and that Paul's words, um, particularly in as he's talking about wrestling with this thorn in the flesh, just continue to echo in my head that here is the Apostle Paul. I mean,
Mhm.
in all of his letters, Romans 7, I mean, my goodness, I do the things I don't want to do, and the things I do, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm wrestling with this tension of being human and then going, you know, God's grace is sufficient. I don't need to try to be and for me, it was don't try to be all things to all people. Like, and I
Mm.
know that well, how Paul meant that was different than how I
Right.
mean it. I don't need to be theologian. I don't need to be, I mean, I'm not trying to pretend I'm the Bible project, you know.
I
There are
love those
people like
guys. Yeah.
you who are, you know, theologians and scholars. Whereas I, on the other hand, I go, I have a place on the wall. God has put me on the wall to serve my role here. And it's not your role, it's not somebody else's role. This is where I am serving. And I can't be on every portion of the wall. And it's okay to do that. So
Yeah. I like that.
was,
Good shout out to the guys from the Bible Project too. Tim Mackey, if you're listening, we love your stuff.
yes, we do. And we would
I
love
don't
a
know that you would be
personal phone
listening.
call.
Yeah. But anyway,
We would
all
like
right.
to have some nerdy conversations.
Would love to be love to have you on the podcast someday.
Yeah.
I like that. Don't take yourself too seriously. Number two,
I
do
wrote,
you have the list there in front of you? Or
I do.
okay.
Be completely present with people. And I totally, when I wrote that, I put completely in all
Uh-huh.
caps.
Yeah.
Um, and once again, this stems from my own insecurities that when I was younger, I was trying so hard to think about how am I going to say something to impress them, or how am I going to? I need something really funny to say, and so I wouldn't hear what people actually said. I wasn't listening.
Mm.
I heard them, but I didn't hear them.
Yeah.
And so now that I've married, I have 4 kids. It's even more of a challenge
Oh
for me
wow.
to sometimes
Hmm.
go be present with your kids. And I remember Landon Saunders in a lecture years ago, um, when I was taking a class. I think it was counseling, basic counseling skills class with
Counseling
Dr. Ed Gray
skills.
at HST,
Yep.
and we had to listen to this lecture. And Landon Saunders talked about Jesus being a radical human presence. And that has stuck with me all these years. That I don't need being completely present with people does not mean that I'm in my mind trying to figure out what am I going to say, how am I going to argue this, but more of just let me just listen to them. It's not about me, it's about them, but also bringing God in that moment and saying, God, help me to be like Jesus in this place. And
Mhm.
so that's hard. Um, but it's just it's that's I've learned that too. It's just I don't stop trying to less of self and more of God. And
Yeah.
in doing that, I am reflecting his image to them when I am being present with them. So
Yeah. How have you noticed this play out in your ministry? Like when you're more present with someone versus when you're just ready to either kind of get over, like get done with the conversation or get to lunch or something like that. Have you seen that play out in your ministry before?
I have particularly I went and became a coach. I went through coaching training because I wanted another tool in my belt, and it was dealing with this particularly that I found it very powerful. That whenever I am present with them and I am asking questions that are probing questions, questions to, oh, you said this. Can you help me understand that a little bit more?
Mhm.
Even when there were times when I really was like, I really would like to go be done with this conversation. If I would just in my mind say, God, help me to be present, and I would ask those questions. Many times what I found was if I just hung in there just a little longer, we could get to the spiritual depth of what was happening.
Okay, yeah.
And that was powerful for me. That still didn't help me alleviate my human desire to be like, okay, really got to go to lunch,
Yeah.
but what I found is in doing that, people let me backtrack. What I have found in doing that is that the Holy Spirit works in those moments, and it's how the Holy Spirit works in their life, but also in me to be able to go, when it's more blessed to give than to receive, if I am giving more of my time to them, I'm blessed by that. It's not just money, it's also my presence, my mind, and that when that happens, the Holy Spirit's working in their lives. But it's such a blessing to see that happen. It doesn't
Yeah.
always happen that way,
Sure.
but it has been very powerful when it has.
Yeah. Yeah, there really is something powerful about asking God for something that you would also be willing to give, whether it's time, money, opportunities, help,
Mhm.
something along those lines. I've seen that become true in my own time in ministry as well. That if I'm going to ask God to help me in this way or to do something like that, I really ought to be willing to extend whatever it is
Yeah.
to somebody else. Yeah. Be
Which,
completely present with
yeah.
people. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, and I was gonna say, and that really feeds into what the third one was on my list.
Yeah. Great natural
Uh,
segue. I like it.
I know that's great. Man, you're Kevin. You should have a podcast. This is awesome.
I'm
Uh,
trying.
but the third one was to be gracious to others because you need them to be gracious to you.
Mhm.
And it feeds well from that. This past Sunday, it's now Wednesday. So I preached on grace. And I said that I really love the grace of God for me. I love to take it and just wrap it up like a blanket and just go, God, I'm so thankful for your grace. I have a really difficult time showing that grace to other people.
Mm.
When someone comes and has a inflammatory comment right before church service, like I just like, God, if you ever were going to strike people down or send angry bears, now is the time, And
Do you get those too?
oh my word, had one on this Sunday when I was preaching on grace, and I
Mm.
realized that night that everything that I said in that sermon about not extending grace to other people had happened because of that.
Mm.
Or not because of that, but that was a clear test for me. And I went, Robin, you just preached about this and you just spoke about this. And that's what you were dealing with right then.
Yeah.
And let go of that, because I don't know what it is about derogatory comments or, when people give us constructive criticism, it's more deconstructive criticism. um
Yeah.
that hangs on We hang on to that so much more than we do, hey, the affirmations, the positive things that happened. I mean, I hung on to some negative things from that interaction with somebody. I don't even know who they were. They just, immediately went into, where's the biblical authority for, fill in the blank,
Mhm.
and they had been in the building 5 minutes. Whereas we had somebody who showed up for the very first time. He said that he had not been in church in years
Mhm.
and felt that he needed to be here this morning. And after service, told one of the elders that, it was the message he needed to hear and that he'll be back Sunday. I mean, it's just those kind of things. And you go,
Yeah.
we should be celebrating what happened here. But for some reason, I'm wrapped up in this because I have a harder time extending grace to those folks and going, let me pray for them. Let me just say, God, I pray that your blessings on them, even though our interaction was not great. May you
Yeah.
bless them. And that's harder. And so for me, that was something that I learned, have learned, and haven't perfected, but still am learning to be able to
Yeah.
take the grace that God gives us is hard to fathom. Um, that we can't do anything to earn it, that we can't do anything to repay it. He freely gives it. And it's so much more difficult for me, though, to freely give that same amount of grace to people because of my
Yeah.
human frailty. So,
And this is only slightly off script. Why do you think it is so easy for us as ministers to hang on to those negative comments rather than to um, more quickly look for and celebrate the positive things?
um, I think pride. I think that we, in our own minds, and this is, I'll speak for Robin. I know that I um, can feel pretty confident in my own abilities, and I can feel pretty confident in the fact that I've studied and I've got ministry experience. And when somebody does something that kind of disrupts that train, I react negatively. And there can be
Yeah.
positive things, which you would think in pride that you want to hear all these positive affirmations, but for some reason those negatives stick. And I don't know, the Apostle Paul seems to deal with a lot of criticism. I mean, he
Yeah.
speaks wonderful things, but Second Corinthians and Galatians, and I mean, he's just going, "Hey, what? I'm you foolish Galatians." I mean, who tricked you? He responds to criticism as well. So I think it's just part of the human condition, but I don't know. There's also a lot of, oh, I should have said this. I should have said this. Oh, I wish I'd have said that.
Yeah.
And it's a sin nature, I think, in me that I want to fight, and I want to be right.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. It's very easy, right? It's strangely all too easy. Maybe some of us would rather believe the negative things about ourselves, maybe as some sort of overcorrecting safeguard to not feel prideful, maybe. But maybe we also want to hear, yeah, and maybe we want to have those, maybe we want to believe those kinds of things in order for somebody to say, no, 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 that's actually not true. You're actually doing a really good job because of X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z. I I'm not any kind of counselor or anything like that to dig that deeply into the psyche of ministers, but those questions are at least interesting to kind of probe a little bit because of the nature of what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I hadn't thought about it too much about why do we hang on to the negative versus the positive. Uh, I do know that when I was a kid, my grandmother always prayed I'd be a minister, and I was like, no. And here I am in ministry, and also you're going to preach, and I was like, no. And here I am preaching. And but she was real big on God doesn't like a proud servant. Be humble, be humble, be humble, which is something important to hear. The problem is the reverse of that happened, not knowing how to take compliments well.
Fair enough.
You go, someone gives you a compliment, and you're like, oh, praise God. That's the immediate response. And they're like, Robin, it's okay to say thank you, you know? Um, and so I think there's also in that, like, uh, we are taught how to deal with positive responses. At least I was, so that I don't get too puffed up. I don't know how to deal with negative, even though as a music major, you stand in front of your peers and you have to stand in front of called juries, and I was a voice major, so all of them like criticize everything you did, even your clothing. And then you would stand in front of your peers once a week, and it's like a studio class, and you had to sing. And I remember as a senior, like I'm singing advanced stuff, and I have these freshmen who can't even, like, they're struggling to pronounce the Italian, and they're like, maybe if you just took a little bit more breath here. They have no idea what they're talking about, but you have to learn to take it. You have to go, thank you thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some wrestling in all of this. It's hard to, poor wretched soul that I am. I just I identify, I think, more as I with Paul in that um I I I know the things I don't want to do, and those are the things that I do. And so
yeah, it's fascinating. You talk about the time in music. We've got that entire enterprise is performance based.
absolutely.
The entire thing is performance based, and to have people sit there for the purpose, right, of critiquing you, I wonder, did those criticisms come better when they were from friends? Can you remember?
Yes, they absolutely did. I had a group of friends that we were very close, sang together all the time. We all were the leaders in our particular sections and all that. And criticism from them came a lot easier than from somebody who,
some freshmen.
yeah, some freshmen, and you're just smile and wave, boys,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. It did come better from friends.
Yeah.
Even still, I can take criticism. Robin, you said, even like preaching, Robin, you did this and you said this. One Sunday I made the mistake. I was off the cuff. I said something about, that first year of marriage, I didn't really love my wife very much, which is not what I meant. I was trying to talk about how there are times when you don't like your wife, but I said I didn't love her instead of I didn't like her. And so that was the biggest joke. And they all, one of my dear friends said, they gave me some criticism about that. And she said, my wife was like, so you didn't love me that first year. I said, I'm sorry. And I could take it, and it didn't bother me. It didn't
Sure.
affect me.
Yeah.
But if it had been a perfect stranger, I probably would not have reacted well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they would not have, they probably would not have known all the time and effort and energy and stuff that you put into your craft, whether it's music performance or in preaching or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That makes sense. Be gracious to others because you need them to be gracious to you. That feels like a very specific application of do unto others what you would have them do to you. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Number 4.
Yeah, what you put into your body, mind, and heart is what will come out. Um, that I started at the beginning of this year. I don't do New Year's resolutions because I break New Year's resolutions. I've never been a big fan of those. But I beginning of this year decided to be very focused about what I put into my body.
Okay.
Not only what I watch, because I love movies. I mean, obviously, I've got Star Wars posters behind me. I love The Lord of the Rings. If there is a movie that involves explosions, adventures, and hobbits, like I am there for it. I've loved the Marvel stuff. My wife and I did a big old Marvel marathon from in order, and it was wonderful. But what I find is that I can consume things both in my mind, what I read, what I watch, and what I eat. And those things are that's what comes out. And so, like, for instance, first thing in the morning, if I grab my phone, turn off the alarm, and I open Facebook or I open the news, that will totally control the narrative of my day. And it's been very interesting. So now I wake up, I don't go on my phone, but I will wake up and we have a little table, and I just sit there in the mornings, drink my coffee, and I nerd out on some Hebrew for a little bit. My mom bought me this, it's the book of Psalms, but it's written in Hebrew, and it's beautiful. It's
very cool.
artistic. And so I will listen to the Psalms read in Hebrew while I'm following along, and just spend time just praying through that. And, I may get on Facebook later on just to share, oh, I read this today, and I'm in Exodus, read this today. This was awesome. But it's, in general, just that shift has made the rest of the day so much better. What I'm watching on TV, if I'm watching the news, it tends to be very, panic driven. Whereas right now, at the time of this recording, there is a gas, the whole pipeline shut down, and people up here in Northern Virginia, even though there's plenty of gas, they're going in panic mode to fill up their tanks. And it's just, well, maybe I need to go get gas. And I'm like, if you didn't have the news, you would have no clue, and life would go on. But also, I made a change in, like, my diet. I wanted to be a good steward of the body that God gave me, and both my mind, my heart, my soul, my mouth. And so I just changed my eating habits, and, lost weight and gotten very much healthier. And that has influenced even my service to God in my worship. I'm not as worried about what I look like on the outside. Oh, is this shirt too tight or anything? It's weird. And, I laugh about it too. I was like, oh man, I'm not feeling too good in this shirt today. I think I'll put on a coat, and hide it. And somebody said, Robin, you're so dressed up. And I was like, yeah, well, a sports coat covers over a multitude of sins, and, but what I've found is that whenever I step away,
I'm laughing so much because I literally do that.
We all do
that.
We all do. I know we do. I do it too. I'm like, I didn't iron my shirt today. Nobody needs to know I'm wearing a coat.
If I'm wearing a solid color, they won't see those lines bulge out on my shirt.
That's right. That's right. My granny used to say, you preach better when you wear a tie. I mean, it was like they had certain rules, and
superpower, man. Yeah.
That's right. I'm like, dog, that I forgot it. But but
It's
in the
freeing, it seems like.
it
Like, if
really
I'm hearing
is.
you right, it
It
seems like it's
really
freeing.
is. And you know, for me, it also is embracing the Shema, or
Mm,
as Scott McKnight would call it, the Jesus Creed. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength,
yeah.
and love your neighbor as yourself. And in doing that, man, it's just my mornings and have the shift in my morning affects
Mhm.
the rest of my day. What I put into my body gives me energy, and um, and I feel good. I mean, and just a shift in all of those things. So it's just being intentional about that. And
Yeah.
I'm not a big like fitness guy. I'm not gonna be selling products, on your podcast or anything like that. It is really just a shift in my mind because I want to be healthy holistically, not for the glory of Robin, but for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And that when I went into that mode, it became a spiritual discipline and that changed what I did. So
I really like how you put it too a minute ago. You described it as stewardship. It's like you have been given this thing, in this particular instance, your body. You've been given this thing. There are ways to use it that will generate the sort of God honoring good, the God honoring human flourishing that was prescribed for us all the way back in the garden, right? All the way back in the Garden of
mhm.
Eden, that became cursed, tainted, perverted, corrupted, all these adjectives that we can use to describe sort of what happened to humans. And actually, Dr. Powell, Mark Powell from Harvard School of Theology, a guy who is, congratulations to him, right, for becoming a new dean of Harding School of Theology.
Yes, that's wonderful.
I think it's a great choice. I had to work so hard to earn my good grades in his class because his stuff didn't come naturally to me. I worked hard in Greek, but Greek came a little bit more naturally for me. And so when some people were really struggling in Greek, I just had to work a little harder. Like I had to study maybe an extra 15 or 30 minutes rather than a whole weekend. That was me.
Yeah.
I wasn't that way with stuff like Dr. Powell, but something that he said that has always stuck with me is when he's talking about the curse of sin, he describes it as a pest. Sin is a pest, and pest is an acronym: personal, ecological, social, and theological. So it strikes individuals, it strikes the earth, it strikes humanity as a whole, and it cuts at our relationship with God.
Mhm.
Stewardship was built into the, like, being good stewards was built there in the beginning, and that still carries through today. That's one of the reasons why, occasionally in especially in Paul's letters, he'll take shots at gluttony because it's not good stewardship.
Yeah.
It is the most socially acceptable sin amongst preachers, though. Like, is,
Yeah.
is that fair?
It is fair. I think it's one of those things that we also don't talk about because a lot of us struggle. It's easy to preach on the things that I don't struggle with. It's a lot harder to preach on the things that I do.
Yeah,
And that is a big deal. So I
yeah,
definitely think that's fair.
yeah.
And
Let me
for
ask
me, it was,
this. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, being as a dad, I want my kids, I don't want to talk about being overweight or underweight, or I don't want to talk about physical appearance as much as about stewardship,
Mhm.
because it's much more than just your food or what you watch. I mean, those things are important, but it's seeing, like you were talking about, all the way from the garden. God gave Adam a role as a steward of creation, and we are that. We still carry that, and I think there's an important place to play in that. Um, I'm a steward of creation. I can't do a whole lot to save the wells. I mean, I guess I could, um, but I can definitely take care of my body. And I understand metabolisms are different, and
Sure. Yeah.
I get all of that. But take care of who you are right now, um, and I can always do better.
Yeah. Yeah. I did want to ask, was your time in campus ministry did your time in campus ministry play a role in you seeing the great importance of this particular principle?
Um, it did, but I didn't think about it as much. I joined a gym when I was in campus ministry. Not because I was trying to get buff, but because I was trying to maintain.
Sure.
There was a restaurant called the Fat Cow that was right around the corner from our student center, and I took students. We went there all the time. They had amazing burgers, and their shakes were pretty good. And you're not going to get away from there without at least eating your daily calorie intake all in one sitting.
Sure.
And it was totally worth it. But
Yeah.
I got into it, but I wasn't thinking about um, this at the same as I was when I was nearing 40, right? So it was
That's
one of those
fair.
things I went, I want to be around for my kids. I want to be
Yeah.
healthy for my grandkids.
Yeah.
I want my wife not to be taking care of me as an invalid, or I mean, she
Mhm.
totally would, because she and I made those promises at our vows,
Yeah.
but I
Despite you
don't
not
want to
loving
do
her
that.
very much in your first year.
oh, oh my goodness.
At
But
least that's what I heard.
yeah, it was, yeah, I'm still, I redeemed myself with Mother's Day, I think. But it's one of those, I come from a family, my dad had a stroke, a massive stroke, probably 17 years ago.
Mhm.
And it really incapacitated him, and still has. And since that time, he didn't do physical therapy. He didn't go get his strength back, and that's been caused a great burden on him, and my mom, and
Yeah.
he can't really play with the grandkids like he wants to, or like he did with us. And I don't want that. And I know that you can't always control those outcomes,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, I do the best that I can. So campus ministry, though, looking back at that, I'm going, man, I wish I would have done a lot of that then.
Mhm.
I had a different mindset. I was also, in campus ministry, my wife was having kids at the time, and I was in grad school. So it was just, sometimes you needed some fat cow in your life. And for me, it was too often. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even too to like help the students in the ministry realize like, hey, y'all, it might be fun to do this it might be fun to engage in these self-destructive behaviors now while you can still relatively quickly recover from that, but you're doing more than just physiological damage to your liver. You're training yourself to cope with problems in a certain way.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I really found also, there were a lot of those conversations. There was also one thing that I found, because the generation that was in campus ministry when I was there was, I think at the time, it was the first generation to have grown up in a world where there was always access to computers, and the
Yeah.
internet. And so one of the biggest things that we were dealing with was pornography. And it wasn't just guys, there were girls as well. I taught a series of lessons from the life of David, and just some of the different things that he dealt with. And we had this, I remember one semester when I taught that, it was this explosion of people coming, students saying, Robin, I'm wrestling with this. And it was not just guys, it was girls too. Now, the girls, I was like, I have no capacity or ability to help you. So let me help you, get you somebody who can
Yeah.
walk with you. But finding that, um, being able to help them see that, when you look at those images, they don't leave. Eventually that stuff, that garbage will kind of disappear, but you'll be in settings and you'll see things, and that you saw years ago, and you don't want to see them, or things that you saw recently, that they always come up, and they not only are things that are going to show up, but they're affecting how your body reacts
Yeah.
to real things. And at the time, there wasn't as much research, but now, at the end of my tenure in campus ministry, that stuff was coming out. And organizations such as Fight the New Drug
Heard
and
of
some of
them.
those, they were really putting out information about, you know that porn kills love. And
Hmm.
so being able to use that to go that, you're putting that in your mind, and it is corrupting you. It is deteriorating you. Um, and you may think it's harmless, but it's not.
Yeah.
So, and that's this is the word I was looking for earlier. That's a microcosm of all of these other things.
Hmm.
A good rack of ribs is awesome. I love smoking meat. But if that's all you put into your body, without any balance into good things,
Yeah.
that eventually will deteriorate your body faster. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I still think you should eat ribs.
We've got it's actually a grilling season down here now. Well, it has been for
Yes.
like a month and a half because we've been in the 70s and the 80s since March. It's been great.
Man,
I love the weather
man, you
down
came
here.
from, and you were in Memphis for a while, which is like
We were in
barbecue
Memphis for a
heaven.
while. Yeah, yeah, and so it's been really neat because we have like I learned a little bit actually from Mark Powell,
Oh
about
yeah.
smoking ribs. So I've got his rib recipe, and man, when they're on, they're dynamite. They're delicious.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
last thing that we've got on this list, we could unpack so much more, right? About particularly pornography or generally Rule 4. But walk us
Yeah.
through number 5 if you don't mind.
The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Sounds like
The
you've been in grad school.
Yes, indeed. Oh man, and all of this, I've said this several times, but it all fuels from my early years of ministry. I had no idea what I was doing.
Mhm.
And I remember just respecting so many of these ministers and preachers from years past and thinking, one day that's going to be great. And I'm going to be, all knowledgeable and all these things. And what I found is I got out of grad school, which taught me how to research.
Yeah.
And I find out that there's so much I just don't know. And what I've noticed, I mean, my dad always used to say that when he was uh when he was young, he had a strong back and a weak mind, and now he's got a weak back and a weak mind. That because he would just say, the older you get, the more you find out how little you know, and that's become true. I mean, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm still learning and I'm still growing, and it's okay to say I don't know.
Yeah.
There's freedom in ministry to be able to go, I don't have a good answer for that. Let me think on that. Let's explore that together.
Yeah.
Because when I was a kid, I will say that I had this perception that these ministers, these preachers, had knew everything, and it was disheartening whenever you found out they said something that they probably shouldn't have answered. They should have went, "That's a great question. I don't know."
Mhm.
They gave an answer, and then it was really horribly wrong, and you were like, "What? What is going on?
Yeah.
These are the sages and they should know everything." And, you know, that wasn't necessarily their fault because we put them on a pedestal. So I just think there's a humility in that to be able to go, I don't really know everything. Once again, it takes a wise man to know who he is and who he's not and to know the difference and be
Mhm.
okay with that. So I'm that's where I'm at. And there's so much more to learn, so much more to grow. And what's funny is that now that I've almost 5 years out of grad school, it'll be 5 years this May, of getting my master's from HST. And like, I've never been more hungry to learn
Mm.
because I wish I could been this hungry when I was in grad school,
Been as
but I'm
motivated,
just,
right?
right. But I'm just growing and learning. And I'm like, maybe I should go for another degree. And my wife sitting back there doing no. But I'm like, man, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I've been doing this 16 plus years. Like, this is awesome. And it's just, I don't know. It's just humbling. And so there's always more to learn, and you always realize how much you don't know.
Yeah. At the risk of putting you on the spot here, what are a couple of go-to resources you've really been digging into the last few years? You mentioned the Bible Project earlier. I think that's a good
Yeah.
one. That's one that I would definitely, wholeheartedly recommend.
Yeah. There's one thing that I've really appreciated. Social media has its positives and its negatives, and sometimes the negatives outweigh the positives.
Mhm.
Um, but being a part of a community online, not where you're trying to correct the wrongs of the church, but be able to ask questions doctrine about doctrine has been helpful. That's not my number one resource. The Bible Project is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I think also there's several great podcasts out there. I've appreciated your podcast because I get to hear from voices that I've heard of or I know who are sharing their ministry experience and
Mhm.
different things. But there are other podcasts out there. Dr. Michael Heiser,
Heard of his? Yeah,
his
I have
the
a couple of his
Naked
books.
Bible Project. Uh, I think the Naked Bible Podcast. He is tremendous when it comes to the Old Testament. I really have
Mhm.
appreciated Tim Mackey of the Bible Project. I love N.T. Wright. Tom Wright has been
Yeah.
very wonderful I mean, I enjoyed him I've been a fan of his writing for a number of years, but he's provided recently, they've done a lot of like teaching videos.
Mhm.
And their classes essentially is what they are, but I've used them for like a small group setting, and it's just been wonderful. I've just grown so much through some of that. And there are some online resources that are free. I mentioned the Bible
Right.
Project.
Mm.
Another one is blueletterbible.org. It's just free.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know the language. I know that we always need to make sure that we say, if you haven't really studied Greek or Hebrew, be careful about saying this is what this means, because
Yeah.
the language isn't like, if it says apple, it means apple. Well, it may have a different ending, and you know, be careful with that.
Mhm.
But Blue Letter Bible provides free resources for its commentaries. It does give interlinear study, where at least we'll put it in a context and give you a little bit of the grammar. But that's a really great resource out there. Of course, there's a ton more, but those
Sure.
are the ones that I use a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but it's amazing what you can find with podcasts nowadays.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Being able to put something in your ear and just listen to people wrestling with a biblical text and draw things out, listen to scholars, and um, you know, that's been really good for me. And sometimes it's things that I remember in grad school. I think it was Dr. Philip McMillan, who was my Old Testament professor,
Hmm.
and him saying, you know, sometimes the things you learn here, you don't want to go and bring to your congregation because it's not helpful,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But he would always say, you're trying to make sure people's faith is in the God of the book. It's not in the book. The book is the divine revelation that reveals God and his work in the
Right.
world. But make sure that you're pointing people to God. Make sure you're pointing people to Jesus.
Right.
And I think there's so many great resources out there to do that.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of voices that are outside. And I mentioned N.T. Wright, Tim Mackey, but there's a lot of voices outside of our fellowship that are wonderful. And the thing is, listen to a lot of different voices, and
Hmm.
then do your own study. Discern what is profitable, what is good, what can I gain from this.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. So
Yeah. I like a lot of the resources that you've mentioned, because of my own personal interaction with those. I mean, I remember Blue Letter Bible. I think I was using their app back in the day before I even had an iPhone. I just had an iPod Touch, and like I could pull it up because at that point I didn't have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars poured into the Bible study software that I use, where like all of the books above me on this shelf up here, I have now on my phone, like
yeah,
my phone or iPad. I just pull it up. I've got all that stuff there, and some of the books over here on the other side of my headphones. Like I've got a lot of that stuff. But Blue Letter Bible was a great way to be able to dig into some of that and have ready access to some of those original texts.
yeah.
Um, One thing that I would not add because of some deficiency, but I would mention because I think you would affirm this also. It's especially helpful if you're a church member and you're curious about is this a good resource? Ask your minister. I mean, part of our
Yeah.
job, I think, sort of an implied part of our job, is to kind of be aware of what's out there to some degree,
Hmm.
to be aware of what's out there, maybe to do a small degree of vetting to know it's like, here's some folks that if I sent you to like Bible Project or NT Wright or something like that, they might come to some slightly different conclusions on some things that we would, but generally what I can check of their research, of their presentation, stuff like that, I can affirm that this stuff is good stuff.
Yeah,
Having somebody like having your ministers or other folks kind of communally say, yeah, these are good recommendations. I think that really goes a long way in helping
absolutely.
some folks. Yeah.
Yeah, I have um, a trio of friends who were on Marco Polo,
Yeah. I just recently
and
got that a couple months ago. It's been fun.
oh, it's a lot of fun and it's great. And I'll get a polo. Hey, Robin, heard this today. Da, da, da. What do you know about this? And have you heard of this person? And I'm like, no, I haven't. So I get their book and I read it, which is also something that I wish I'd done in grad school more. I didn't read. I hated reading because I had forced to do it.
Mhm.
Now I can't put books down. I'm like,
Yeah.
in fact, I actually understand why a library card is useful. Before I was like, I get books and I just kept having to extend it because I never read them. But it's in doing that they come and ask questions, and it's good for me. It helps me grow, but it also I'm able to speak into that. But you're right. I think part of our job is a huge part of our job is equipping the saints, and it
Mhm.
is helping to yes, we want to edify the church, but it's also equipping them to grow on their own and to walk in those moments. So yeah.
Yeah. Robin, I really appreciate your time today with us, brother. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe when you hit 50, let's do another. Let's do one before then, right? But
Yes, as the
maybe when you hit
snowball continues to roll downhill.
well toward, towards that grave, those black balloons on it.
That's right.
Yeah. No, but this has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed getting to dig through this list with you, and I think it's a good exercise, really, for folks to be able to look back and reflect and say, okay, if I were to do it all over again, here's some principles that I wish I had known and committed to, and was motivated to operate with during those early years. This has been a fun list. Um, any last final word before we wrap up today?
No, it's been a lot of fun. I know this was maybe a little longer than you were expecting. It's always better to have more material. You can edit it out, but there. I think the biggest thing that what this list does, at least for us ministers, and especially those who are young in ministry,
Mhm.
is it's okay to be human. That your trust is not in you; it's in God, and it's about humility. We all
Yeah,
need it, and that goes a long way in the mission of the church. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of where I am with all of these things. And more of Jesus and a lot less of me would be great for the whole world.
Amen. Amen. All right, Robin. Thank you, brother. Take care.
Yeah, man. All right.